Today, we're digging into social movements, those hidden forces, the collective efforts by regular people that have completely rocked our history and are still shaping our future right now. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at rights you probably don't even think about, but were fiercely fought for. Then, we'll get into what actually makes a movement tick, we'll explore the different kinds they come in, see how they've changed over time, and wrap up with why they're still such a massive deal in the world today.
Okay, let's dive right in by looking at some things that just feel normal. Because honestly, the very rhythm of our daily lives, it's often built on the forgotten battlegrounds of struggles that happened long before we were born.
No, really. It's so easy to just assume that things like a 5-day work week or an 8-hour workday were always there. But nope, they weren't just gifts handed down from on high. They were won inch by inch through decades of protest by workers' movements. From the civil rights movement demanding basic human dignity in the US, to the anti-colonial movements that redrew the map of the world, social movements have basically rewired the planet we live on. You could say they're the real engine of change. Gandhi's Salt March is such a perfect example of this in action. I mean, when he and his followers walked to the sea to make their own salt, sure, they were breaking an unjust law, but they were doing so much more. They were showing millions of people that a different future was possible. It just proves how a single, focused action can challenge an entire empire. And get this, the right to vote, something we consider absolutely fundamental, was once a perk for the wealthy. Even in Britain, the supposed cradle of modern democracy, your say in how the country was run depended on whether you owned a piece of land. So what happened? People organized. The Chartist movement gathered over 3 million signatures back in 1842, demanding political rights for ordinary working men. In a country that size, that number is just staggering. It wasn't a request, it was a roar from the people demanding to be heard. So, what's the secret sauce? What turns a protest or a bunch of angry people into a powerful social movement that can actually bend the arc of history? Those 3 million signatures give us a hint, but there's a bit more to it. Here's the key thing to remember. A real social movement isn't just a flash in the pan. It's not a one-off protest that disappears the next day. It's a sustained collective push. It has to have a clear goal, a shared belief system, and, more often than not, it's aimed squarely at the state, demanding change. You can really break it down into these 3 essential pieces. First, you need staying power. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Second, you need some organization, a way to make decisions and keep things moving. And finally, and maybe most importantly, everybody has to be on the same page, fighting for the same thing, driven by the same vision. Here's a cool way to think about the difference. If social change in general is like a giant, slow-moving river that's shaped by millions of tiny individual actions, a social movement is a group of people getting together and saying, you know what, we're going to build a dam right here and change this river's course for good. But, that kind of change is never easy. It's almost never unopposed. When reformers in 19th century India worked to ban the practice of sati, defenders of the tradition didn't just sit back. They organized their own counter-movement to protect things as they were. Push for change, and you're almost guaranteed to get some pushback. Now, not all movements are trying to, overthrow the government. They come in different flavors with different goals, from trying to change one person's mind to trying to change the entire structure of society. We can kind of put them into 3 big buckets. You've got your redemptive movements, which are all about personal transformation. Then you have reformist ones, which work inside the existing system to make things better. And then you've got the big one, revolutionary movements, which want to scrap the old system and start over from scratch. And you can see how this plays out with some real-world examples here. A redemptive movement? That could be a spiritual leader inspiring their community to adopt new social habits. Reformist? Think about the long, slow fight for something like the Right to Information Act. And revolutionary? Well, that's the Bolsheviks in Russia toppling the Tsar and creating a whole new kind of country. So, just like everything else, social movements themselves have evolved. The big fights of the 19th and 20th centuries aren't always the same fights that people are having today. The game has changed. You can kind of see it as a shift from old to new. The old movements were often these classic class-based struggles, workers versus factory owners, and they were usually led by political parties. But the new movements, they're often about quality of life. Think environmentalism or struggles over identity, and they pull people in from all walks of life, united not by their job, but by a shared value or a common fear.
And because problems like climate change or the downsides of globalization don't care about borders, these new movements have gone global. Thanks to the internet and social media, activists can now build huge international networks to take on challenges that affect every single one of us, no matter where we live. Okay, to really see how all these pieces, the goals, the organization, the pushback, all come together, let's look at one of the most incredible ecological movements out of India. It's a story that has it all. The story of the Chipko movement starts, as so many do, with a catastrophe. After a terrible flood ripped through their region, villagers in the Himalayas started connecting the dots. They realized that the commercial logging on their hillsides wasn't just taking trees, it was causing the landslides and floods that were destroying their very lives. So what did they do? Women like Gara Devi rallied their villages. And when the logging contractors arrived, they did something simple, nonviolent, and incredibly powerful. They hugged the trees. They literally put their bodies on the line to protect their forest. It's such a powerful image, right? And what's so amazing about the Chipko movement is that it wasn't just about one thing. On one level, it was an economic fight, their livelihoods versus government profits. On another, it was an ecological battle to save their environment. And underneath it all, it was a political struggle for local people to have a say over their own future. So, at the end of the day, the big takeaway is that social movements aren't just something you read about in a history book. They are a living, breathing, essential part of how our societies work. They're how ordinary people together demand a better world. And that struggle, it's always happening. And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? As our world barrels into the future, facing all kinds of new challenges, from AI to new waves of inequality, you can be sure that new movements